Good afternoon. It's Wednesday, September 30th. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan, and this is IBA News broadcasting from Jerusalem. Israeli aircraft struck terrorist targets in Gaza early this morning after rockets were fired at Israel. The Air Force says that 4 Hamas training camps were hit. There were no injuries reported from Gaza. Hamas did not claim responsibility for firing the rocket toward Israel. But the army issued a statement saying that Hamas is held responsible for all terrorist activities emanating from the Gaza Strip. The Israeli strikes came in response to Gaza-based terrorists firing a rocket towards Ashdod, setting off the air raid sirens over the city. The incoming rocket was intercepted by the Iron Dome anti-rocket battery at about 10:45 last night. The warhead exploded, and fortunately there were no injuries as a result of the falling debris. The rocket attack came as thousands were outdoors in Ashdod attending holiday events. Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon has responded to the Russian criticism of an Israeli retaliatory strike at Syrian army targets during the Sukkot holiday. Speaking during a tour near the Gaza border, Ya'alon said that Israel is not coordinating its actions with Russia. According to Ya'alon, Israel had made it clear to Moscow, and also in the meeting between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Russian President Vladimir Putin, that Israel has no intention of allowing anyone to prevent us from defending our interests. We will hit anyone who tries to violate our sovereignty, and that includes anyone who tries to transfer advanced weapons systems to terror organizations, especially Hezbollah, he said. Ya'alon spoke last night before the rocket attack on Ashdod. In the Old City, scuffles broke out as police detained 4 Arab protesters who were attempting to block Jewish worshippers from reaching the Western Wall. Jerusalem police deployed thousands of forces in and around the Old City today to ensure the safety of visitors and prevent clashes with Palestinian rioters. Police said that they were showing zero tolerance for any attempts to disturb the peace and arrested at least 14 Arab residents of Jerusalem overnight. Despite the tensions, thousands of Jews from Israel and around the world gathered at the Western Wall Plaza this morning for the traditional priestly blessing ceremony held annually during the intermediate days of Sukkot. Priests, or Kohanim, lead the communal prayers by chanting 3 consecutive verses of the Torah, one word at a time. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has arrived in New York ahead of his address tomorrow to the UN General Assembly. The Prime Minister told the traveling press on the plane to New York that he plans to use the speech to tell the world that Iran remains the root cause for the unrest in the Middle East. Netanyahu will try to dispel the impression created in the international community that after the nuclear accord, Iran no longer poses a grave danger to Israel or the Middle East at large. The speech will deal with what Israel calls the enormous onslaught in the Middle East, which will be the main focus of his speech. Netanyahu told reporters that Iran is the problem not just for Israel but for others in the region, and this could serve as a basis for cooperation, and that ridding Iran of influence in the region is the key to solving the Syrian civil war. Ahead of his speech, Netanyahu will meet with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, where the focus of talks is expected to be on the strengthening of Israeli security in the wake of an Iran deal and the stalled Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is scheduled to address the General Assembly tonight and will later attend a ceremony during which the Palestinian flag will be raised at the building for the first time. Ahead of his speech, Abbas wrote an op-ed in the Huffington Post in which he wrote that a new multilateral approach is needed to deal with the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since direct negotiations have failed. Abbas said that what is needed is a negotiation process based on the type of process that took place in the Balkans, Libya, and the Iranian nuclear talks. In his harshly worded comments, Abbas lashed out at Israel, saying that the Palestinians cannot directly negotiate with the power that has this level of control and exhibits contempt for the rights and existence of the Palestinian people. Well, joining us now in the Tel Aviv studio is Danny Ayalon, a former deputy foreign minister and ambassador to Washington. Thanks for joining us, Danny.
You're most welcome, Aryeh.
Well, the Prime Minister is to address the General Assembly tomorrow, and what can he say that's going to be pertinent and not make him look like yesterday's man harping on about Iran?
Well, probably there will be 3 issues, I think, on the table. On Iran, the deal is fait accompli. There's not much to do about it. So I think what the Prime Minister will do is will emphasize, of course, the risk to the international community, of course, to Israel, to the region. But most importantly, he will try to galvanize a support in the international community for very, very strict compliance by the Iranians. So for any breach by the Iranians, there should be a very tough response from the international community. That would be the most important thing for him to do. And of course, the other things, I believe, would be the Palestinian issue. And here, probably he would be well advised to repeat what he said last week in London, where he really offers and welcomes the Palestinian president to Jerusalem, or is willing to go to Ramallah for direct negotiations without preconditions. I think that could really bring in some sympathy. And the third thing would be a great platform for Israel to show the contribution that we do give to the international community in terms of food security, water availabilities, energy, and everything which on the verge of the 8th millennium of the UN, the agenda is set in a larger way by the leaders of the UN and the international community.
Well, Ambassador, the Palestinian-Israeli issue seems to have gone right off the radar of the UN. Should Israel be insulted that we're not at the top of the agenda?
Well, quite the opposite, Ari. Unfortunately, when the Palestinian agenda or when Israel is being discussed at the UN is always to our detriment. There is an automatic Arab or Muslim majority against us, and usually we get condemned without any fair chance to even respond. And the case now is that I think that by the reason of the new reality, that more and more countries and leaders understand that it is not the Palestinian problem that poses the most immediate or the most grave danger to the world's security and stability. So the proportion of the Palestinian problem now is becoming quite calibrated to its normal size.
And yet, Obama will meet with Prime Minister Netanyahu in November, so this will likely come up anyway, right?
Absolutely, and I think that will be a most important meeting, especially in the wake of the Vienna, the nuclear agreement with Iran. And here, I believe, most of the talk will be on how the compensation will take place in terms of how you or how the U.S. will help Israel to upgrade its deterrence capabilities and its defense capabilities.
Well, Chairman Mahmoud Abbas is going to address the General Assembly tonight. He's supposed to drop a bombshell. What do you think he's going to say?
Well, I'm not sure he has too many cards to play after the entire Palestinian problem was not even mentioned by President Obama, and very minorly, in a minor way, but by other leaders. So I don't think he has too much to offer. He said already he will not resign. He said he will not actually disassemble the Palestinian Authority, which would be against their own interests. So I don't think that he will really have anything to show for all the, I would say, all the interest he tried to create by actually creating a drama or trying to create a drama.
Well, Ambassador Ayalon, thanks for joining IBA News.
Thank you.
Russian lawmakers today voted unanimously to allow President Vladimir Putin to send Russian troops to Syria. The Kremlin sought to play down the decision, saying it only intends to use its air force and not ground troops. According to the Russian law, Putin has to request parliamentary approval for any use of Russian troops abroad. The last time he did so was before Russia annexed Ukraine's Crimean Peninsula in March 2014. Russian officials say that military action is necessary in order to support the government forces of Bashar al-Assad in its fight against Islamic State. They added that it was a matter of national security because Moscow was worried about the growing number of Russians going off to fight for the Islamic State. On the sidelines of the UN General Assembly, U.S. President Barack Obama chaired a session of world leaders devoted to fighting and defeating Islamic State. Obama said that it will be a long struggle, but with the backing of some 60 coalition states, ultimately the battle will be run.
I have repeatedly said that our approach will take time. This is not an easy task. We have ISIL taking root in areas that already are suffering from failed governance in some cases civil war or sectarian strife, and as a consequence of the vacuum that exists in many of these areas, ISIL has been able to dig in. They've shown themselves to be resilient, and they are very effective through social media and have been able to attract adherents, not just from the areas in which they operate, but in many of our own countries. There are going to be successes, and there are going to be setbacks. This is not a conventional battle. This is a long-term campaign, not only against this particular network, but against its ideology.
We have to be frank that the biggest problem we have today is the Islamist extremist violence that has given birth to ISIL, to Al-Shabaab, to Al-Nusra, Al-Qaeda, and so many other groups. Now, these people claim to act in the name of the Islamic religion. They don't. I can say they don't. I can say they don't over and over again. You can say they don't, but there's nothing more powerful than what, for instance, the King of Jordan has just said when Muslim leaders and Muslim countries reclaim their religion and explain why what these people are saying is not Islam, it is a perversion of Islam. So we have to do that and to take away the building blocks of extremism that lead people to an extremist worldview that then takes them to an extremist terrorist view. That, I think, is as important as the military, political, diplomatic, and other steps that we'll take as part of this vital campaign.
These regime forces still fight their own countrymen instead of focusing on the threat of terrorism. Whoever talks to Assad should therefore convey one clear message: stop slaughtering your own people, start fighting ISIS and its likes.
The sidelines of the UN General Assembly has often been the scene of groundbreaking meetings, and there was much interest as U.S. President Obama held talks with Cuban President Raul Castro. Castro and Obama stunned the world last December by announcing détente between their two countries after more than 5 decades of animosity. In July, the two nations restored diplomatic relations, but a U.S. trade embargo remains in place. The U.S. president said that while there are still differences with the Cuban government over human rights and other issues, he was confident that over time Congress will lift the embargo that remains in place. The Syrian refugee crisis is high on the agenda at the UN General Assembly, and EU Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini demanded that world leaders do more to tackle the problem.
Well, we had a very important session of work co-hosted by our Jordan friends on the issue of the Syrian refugees. I was visiting myself the camps in Jordan itself, not now, not 1 week ago, but in December. I think we have to stay focused on this, and I think we have to use this new sense of urgency that is growing in Europe in particular, but in the rest of the world, to push for doing more on the humanitarian side, giving more money to the agencies starting from the UNHCR, but also the World Food Programme, that are doing an excellent work not only in the camps, but also at the same time to push for doing something better on the political track and on the security track. So doing more on the humanitarian, working also on some possibilities of opening safe passages for humanitarian help inside Syria, doing more on the humanitarian, doing more together, and different on the political and security side.
Lawmakers from around the world assembled in Jerusalem this week to show their support for Israel and combating BDS. The 22 parliamentarians come from 18 countries and are attending an annual gathering which coincides with the Sukkot holiday. They heard an address from Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat and are scheduled to meet with Public Security Minister Gilad Erdan, who also holds the BDS portfolio.
It's a thing which simply will bring some tense negativity, and it only will harm the business and relationships.
European policies are discriminatory against Israel. What's that mean? That means in other territories the Europeans consider occupied, they have a completely different set of policies.
I'm a good friend of many of the ministers in the new government, and if I know that if I'm speaking out clear, they are listening.
There are many misperceptions in Europe, so I think that such initiatives like the coming of parliamentarians, of European parliamentarians in Israel, will facilitate the way in order to have a better view of the situation here on the ground in Israel.
Many people do not know, but Jerusalem is doing pretty well. Our economy, our budgets have been growing on average 10% from year to year in the last 7 years. Balanced, of course. When you look at the results in tourism, in growth of the economy, the number of startups, Jerusalem 3 months ago, we came from the top 5 emerging tech hubs in the world. Jerusalem is perceived to be #1 today through an Entrepreneur magazine and a Time magazine. We just entered the top 10 most attractive cities for tourism just 2 months ago. And when you look at the numbers of job creation and other parameters that are relevant for growth, you see Jerusalem is way up high in the growth list. When you walk our streets, lift your eyes into the skyline, you'll see many, many cranes in the air. Hopefully you agree with me as parliamentarians that that's a sign of growth and people believing in our future. And so people ask me, where's the future? I say, well, the future is fulfilling our vision, which is a 3,000-year-old vision, consistently maintaining an open international, open city, building the city for growth, managing our economy. Our crime rates are practically one of the smallest in the world. So hopefully we're doing something right. And people ask me why I'm optimistic, because I don't let too much news confuse me. I know that we're headed in the right direction, and you're welcome to enjoy our city.
Well, the Jerusalem Light Rail is back on track. After a one-day wildcat work stoppage by drivers, the Jerusalem District Labor Court issued back-to-work orders. During the one-day de facto strike that came during heated salary negotiations, most drivers called in sick. Judge Sarah Shidhor would have none of that, saying it could not be a coincidence that all the drivers are sick at the same time. CityPass, which manages the rail service, told the court that workers were illegally trying to improve their employment at a time when holiday travel on the light rail is at its peak. In Kiryat Gat, the Antiquities Authority has put on display a rare 1,500-year-old mosaic that once served as the floor of a Byzantine-era church. School children exposed the mosaic 2 years ago, and it was removed for conservation. Now it's been brought back, and its magnificent beauty is being revealed to the public. According to the archaeologist, the mosaic depicts streets and buildings that form a sort of ancient map, and inscriptions that said it depicts the ancient city of Chatazor, the traditional burial site of the prophet Habakkuk. The mosaic has 17 shades of colored stones and can be seen at the Kiryat Gat Industrial Park next to the Intel factory. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis are taking advantage of the beautiful holiday weather to tour the country. In the Hula Valley, folks got a first-hand look at farming techniques and even saw working antique tractors. The streams in the north are also popular with rafters, and some 30,000 people visited the parks along the Jordan River. At the Hula Reserve, folks got a glimpse of the early birds who have begun their migration to Africa. In financial news, the shekel today gained in strength against all major foreign currencies, and the share prices on the Tel Aviv Stock Exchange were mixed across the board. Here's a look at the afternoon numbers. Taking a look at the weather, and the beautiful conditions will continue tomorrow with partly cloudy skies and a slight rise in temperature. Here's a look at the expected highs and lows at home and abroad for the next 24 hours. That's all for today. I'm Aryeh O'Sullivan. I'll be back tomorrow, same time, same channel, to give you the latest news from Israel. Until then, thanks for watching, and shalom from Jerusalem.